Hey guys, Timon here, and with the new Monster Hunter Wilds game coming out, I decided I wanted to make a model of my favorite monster before the game comes out. So here's a look at how I did it. So this started around 2 weeks ago when I wanted to make something for a game series that I really love nowadays. I put a ton of hours into World and Rise, and I'm excited that I'm going to be playing Wilds with a ton of people. Back in the Monster Hunter days, when I was getting invested into the game with my 3 best friends, it was after defeating Zoromatharos, and we decided to try one of the new high rank missions that we got after we beat him. After a couple of them, we had to hunt Anjanath. While we were fighting it to the death, a sudden screech can be heard off in the distance, and the music suddenly changed into such a dramatic one, and then BAM! Bazelgeuse fucking dive bomb us and Anjanath. We were all completely caught off guard, and that just utterly destroyed us and the monster. He was just a giant cargo bomber plane. I just fell in love with him at the moment. He was such a cool monster. I needed to hunt Bazelgeuse to get all of his armor. Too bad there wasn't an actual mission to hunt at the time because, I don't know, that's just how World worked. And so we had to go on explorations to capture him and then fight him in the arena. And oh my god, that was such a fun monster to fight, and that's how I fell in love with Bazelgeuse. Oh, I guess I should actually start the process of making the model. I had to get a couple of references, and then I was off to Blender to start making Bazelgeuse. The first thing that I've gotten used to is to make sure to always start off with simple shapes. I always take a cube, subdivide it, and make sure to stretch them out to make sure I can get the simple shape of the monster or whatever I'm making. The feet were actually the hardest part. In hindsight, I should have just made them 3 separate objects for each toe, but it came out alright. I didn't want to make a big fuss of it because it was my first monster model that I was making. After I got the relative shape of it, I made sure to duplicate it, hide the extra, and then get to sculpting it. Making sure to remesh all the parts into one big body and add some details and shape refinements. I didn't do too much sculpting because I was going to re-topologize it later, but after I was finished sculpting, I kind of realized that I tried to make a more realistic Bazelgeuse, and yet I wanted to make a more cartoonish version. So guess what? I had to redo the whole thing, and it didn't take that long. I just had to edit how the proportions were, but it only took an extra hour. And we just did the same thing before, duplicate it and remesh it, and BAM! It's time to step into the realm of retopology. I hate it. Alright, I actually don't hate it. I've gotten to enjoy this process a fair bit more when I do it more. Sometimes it gets a bit confusing, but as long as you fill it out, it's usually fine. For this model, I looked at the limbs first and made sure those had the right amount of vertices to them, just to make sure I don't accidentally have too much or too little later on. But I should have made an extra one for the ankles of this monster, but someone called this the divide and conquer method, which is basically making sure that all the important parts have the right amount of topology and you connect them with a bridge and then fill them out later. Because you know, you're not going to need that many faces for the back or the underside of the monster. This part took me the longest of the 2 sessions because this was my very first monster-esque model, but I made sure to work on it. There was a helpful guide to help make the transition of lots of the edges into a smaller amount, but I kinda guessed how it worked in some areas and it just kinda worked. I'm not really sure about the whole thing, but I need to research it a bit more and kinda actually understand it, you know. Simple stuff. But just don't look at the feet. I feel like those came out the worst. But it'll work for this kind of model for now, and I'm not that big of a perfectionist, at least behind the scenes. It only took me about 4-ish hours to get all this wrapped up, but it's now time to move on to something that I'm not very good at. Texture painting. You have no idea how unskilled I am in this territory. Luckily, YouTube Paint has made it a lot easier, but I can tell my texture painting skills are very lackluster and I'm going to need to practice in this field a ton in the future. This took me about another 4 hours to texture paint this guy and get him to the colors I think worked out the best. Doing some experimenting with the little scuff marks on him to show that he's been in battle a fair amount. And with that, we finally completed Bazelgeuse, my favorite monster, Monster Hunter. Finally! And oh boy, I'm kind of cutting it close with the release of Monster Hunter Wilds. But let me reflect on this. At the end of this, I sort of had a flashback to actually playing Monster Hunter Stories 2 and realizing that I could have used a model from that game as more of a reference point for myself and bashed my head onto the desk for forgetting that game existed for some reason. And my texture painting needs a lot of work, along with trying to re-topologize things. But I mean, I'm still working on it, but I think I am getting very used to modeling, which makes me extremely happy that it sort of resembles a monster from a stupidly realistic game. And now, it's time to actually work on this video so I can non-stop play Wilds for when it comes out. And pray to God that I don't die too many times in there. Bye!